Good afternoon, folks. This is Tom Willey. First and foremost, thank you folks for attending the latest in a series of webinars from B2W Software. Today's webinar is our company ready for equipment maintenance software? So we see a lot of clients that go through a very detailed and sometimes confusing process to try and find maintenance software. And some of them get through part or even all that process and realize they're just not ready yet. So we're going to be going through kind of what decision process might help folks out to decide whether or not they should use equipment maintenance software. And this might sound strange coming from an equipment maintenance software vendor, but sometimes the answer is no. Sometimes there's not a right time. As we go through this, the reason that this is coming up as part of our webinar series and really in the greater marketplace is just a huge renewed attention on the equipment fleets of our customers. Heavy construction fleets are under tremendous pressure. They have been for a very long time in order to produce revenue for the amount of money that it costs to have and maintain that fleet. But when you layer on top of it all the challenges today in terms of being able to simply source equipment and properly maintain it by being able to source parts or even hire and retain mechanics, it's taken on renewed importance for our clients. So let's go ahead and get started. First, a couple of quick introductions. My name is Tom Willey. I am a Senior Solutions Engineer here at B2W Software. And joining me is Pat DeMecco, who's also a Solutions Engineer. Pat will be monitoring the questions panel, so he'll be essentially a silent partner. But as we go through the presentation, if there are questions, please do feel free to ask them in the questions panel. And if it's something that pertains to the topic and is good for the larger group, we'll probably answer that in the context of the webinar. If it is off topic or something that doesn't really apply to the material at hand, we might answer that offline. But do make use of that. We leave space at the end for questions, but we probably won't need to wait for that spot. Ask them as you go. So let's take a quick look at our agenda. So we're going to start out by going at the beginning here. Why do people look for maintenance management software in the first place? What we'll do is we'll talk about some of the problems that people experience in their organization that drives them to the conclusion they might need maintenance management software. And then we'll look at, well, what does maintenance management software do? How do these solutions in the marketplace generally address those problems that force people to start looking in the first place? And then what we'll do is we'll leave PowerPoint and we'll go through a demonstration. We'll show you in the software how systems manifest those solutions and how they dramatically improve maintenance organizations and address those problems. Then after we look at the software, we'll take a look at the actual return on investment. So we have a simple but valid ROI tool that can start to quantify some of those values that people get from the software. So we'll literally look at what would it cost to get some solutions and what is one way of monetizing the benefits to show what the return is on that investment. And then one of the last bullets, we'll look at why not to use maintenance software. So we'll look at how it makes your life better, makes everything easier to use. What are some reasons that maybe it isn't the time to do that? What are some challenges that companies face that might legitimately push off that decision until they're ready? Then we'll do a quick summary of what we learned today, and then we'll leave some time for Q&A. So let's start out here. First and foremost, why do people use a maintenance management software solution? Well, these bullets here kind of outline some of the greatest reasons. One is that the process seems very inefficient. Clients see that they're maintaining their organization, their fleet, but they know that it could be better, could be easier. Their workflows are taking more time than they feel they ought to, that these workflows are manual and require a whole bunch of steps. Those first two bullets are really closely related. They'll look at how their maintenance team gets the job done, and they'll say there has to be a better way. And just some examples would be things like, in order for me to perform maintenance, I need to get a request in, someone has to bring it someplace, someone has to take the request and write up a work order, and then someone has to come in and get the work order. Or for PMs, that's an even bigger time sink in that I might need to go out and get meter readings. Then I have to go to a different place and look at the equipment record and say, well, when is it due for service? Did it have it? Then I might need to go to a third place to say, well, what's involved in that service? And each one of these actions is something that a person has to do. They have to know they need to do it, go out and do it, and go to multiple places to get what should be an integrated activity done. And so manual requiring multiple steps, it can be very inefficient, and then low or no visibility to that data. Once these maintenance functions are performed, there really isn't any simple or easy place to find out, well, how did we do? Did we meet our goals in terms of maintaining the fleet? Did we perform PMs on time? Or what are we spending? And is that high or low for what we should be spending on equipment? A lot of times people can't get that data, or if they can, it goes back up to inefficient workflows requiring multiple steps, because a person has to go and cobble that data together, either from paper or from multiple different Excel sheets, and then put it together in a way that makes sense. So a huge amount of effort might be expended in getting that data to be usable. Another big reason is that organizations realize that they're simply too reactive. So, you can talk to shops and they say, well, we do a great job. We have really low response time to all of the problems out in the field. And they've engineered their entire maintenance organization around responding to problems and getting equipment back up and running. But the problem is that's usually a symptom of the fact that there's no preventive maintenance. And clients can recognize huge gains if they shift their organization to performing maintenance functions that prevent breakdowns. So if they can start to shift that from reactive to proactive, they see less downtime, and they also have more efficiency, because they're not sending people out unexpectedly on short notice far away. They're choosing when those machines get maintained, and they're planning the production around them. Also, reactive can really be a symptom of who's shouting the loudest. So we talk about prioritizing the loudest foreman, and not necessarily what the greatest benefit to the company is. So if someone's, complaining about a torn seat cushion or this or that, and that gets on the docket, but no one's really looking at the corrective maintenance, the things they can't see, they're oftentimes putting effort and their finite resources against what's, in essence, a convenience, rather than looking at what prevents the fleet from experiencing downtime, which is really the last bullet here, and that's unacceptable level of machine failures. So more and more, these projects rely on very tight time frames to achieve the level of production and productivity and profitability that clients need to make sure they're getting the profit margins they expect from jobs. And so having machine failures essentially costs a lot of money. And when we say repair costs are high, there's quite a few studies that will show that the same repair, if you do it as a PM, as a corrective maintenance, costs less money than if that same thing has to be done as a failure, because you're now carrying the cost of all the down production time, the lost production time when that machine fails in the field in the middle of an activity, as well as the risk that it could simply damage something else when it fails. So those are all things that clients experience that says, look, we can do better in maintenance. So that moves us to the next slide here. What does maintenance management software do? And so, to no one's surprise here, maintenance management software, selected and implemented correctly, should reduce or eliminate those problems. So when we say, well, inefficient workflow takes too long, maintenance management software should streamline those workflows. So as an example, rather than having disparate pieces of paper or phone calls, you should be able to centralize the requests through a single system and see them all in one place. So rather than many people going out to many places and gathering complaints and problems, the complaints and problems come directly to you with actionable information inside the system. And we'll talk about how we can do that, not just within maintain, but our other elements as well, track and inform. Work order management becomes a huge place where you can streamline and increase efficiency. Because again, instead of having to write out paper work orders or put them in 4 different Excel formats, and then someone has to come in and get the work order, it's an electronic system, so the work order can be created in the office and immediately distributed out to the field where it belongs, and it can have a level of prioritization that's appropriate for the work that needs to be done. Another huge one is meter readings, and that's going to be related to the next bullet, which is improving PM compliance. But you can remove a huge amount of inefficiency by removing the need for a person to go out and record meter readings and bring them back and put them into an equipment record if the system can simply, A, do it for you, and even if it can't do it automatically through telematics, again, it provides a single interface for you to enter the readings, and then they're immediately part of the record, which then immediately powers preventive maintenance. So other things that maintenance management software do, this is arguably one of the biggest and most important ones, is that it improves PM compliance. And the way it does that is by proactively telling you when the PMs are due. So you now no longer have to have a person that's constantly looking at the meter readings, looking at the equipment record, seeing if it's been done, seeing when it needs to be done, and then building a work order to get it done. A good maintenance management software does all of that for you. It's keeping track of when the last service was, when the next service is due. It's telling you well ahead of when that service is due, hey, you need to plan for this service to be done on this date. And it can dramatically automate the creation of that work order because a lot of the things on there are knowns. I know what parts I need. I know how long it should take. So good systems should improve that. And then on the back end, it should provide real-time access to data. So if you've been managing the repair requests, creating the work orders, gathering meter readings, and doing your PMs, it should be a very simple and automated process for you to then click some buttons and see, how are we doing? Did we meet our goals? Are we experiencing abnormally high repair costs on a piece of equipment? Or, do we have too much overtime? Being able to see where your fleet and maintenance operations are gives you the tools to then decide where you're strong and where you need to improve. So those are two big pieces of the puzzle there. What are the problems that people experience? How does software potentially solve those? Let's jump in and start to look at some of those things. So one of the first things we're going to do is we're going to go into our B2W mobile app. So to show you some of the capabilities inside of Maintain, I'm actually going to start inside of B2W Track. So I'm going to bring up my tablet here, and I'm going to go inside the mobile app, and I'm logged in as a Track user. So I am a foreman that's out in the field, and I'm using my tablet to create what are called field logs. And the first two things I want you to see is that we can contribute to those streamlining of operations by first and foremost allowing you to put in meter readings. So this is optional, but if you want your field staff to be able to, they could enter in start and stop meter reading times, and they would be able to update those meters from the field. Okay, these can even be made mandatory if you want them to be. Now, we'll talk about this a little bit later, but we can also pull in telematics or meter readings directly from the equipment. So if they have telematics devices that are a part of the standard, we can pull that in so they might not even need to do this manually. But it gives you another option, especially for maybe equipment that doesn't have telematics, so they can enter that information in and make sure that all the machines, whether they have telematics or not, are able to get their updates when they need them. So that's thing number one, being able to extend that out into the field. The next thing is the ability to put in those kind of repair requests. So not only can I put in these meter readings, but if I'm allowed to, I also have the ability to just send in some type of request. So again, rather than putting in a passive-aggressive sticky note or having to call or text or email, I can simply go and say, look, I want to put in a request for this piece of equipment. I look up the piece of equipment that I want to put in the request for, and I could see any of the requests that are out to hopefully prevent me from putting in a duplicate request. I'm just going to say here this, pulls to the left. I could put in other information like, is this a repair? Is it a corrective action? I could also put in maintenance coding and pictures and basically put in meaningful information so that when it gets to the shop, they kind of know what to do. So that's how B2W Track can contribute. We'll also look at other methods that people can use. I'm going to move into another area here. Looks like we had a question come in. Does this software integrate with major manufacturers and their current systems? It does if you mean in terms of the telematics. So we adhere to, or we can pull in information from any telematics provider that adheres to the AEMP standard. Even for telematics that don't adhere to that standard, we also have the ability to pull in through a file and other methods. So it does integrate with major manufacturers, for example, CAD, Komatsu, Volvo, John Deere, all those guys, and quite a few others. So hopefully that answered the question. If it didn't, please feel free to clarify. So I'm going to move into B2W Inform. Now this is our enterprise data collection and analysis tool. So it allows clients to create an unlimited number of electronic forms. And a lot of times, one of the forms that they want to create is an equipment inspection form. And so I can actually create forms that allow me to go out and put in inspections, say, yep, I worked on this job, and I can see here I have different sections for things like safety equipment, electrical. And as I go through, I can rate whether they're good, very good, or poor, repair needed. And so we can engineer forms so that if I say, yep, the seat belts are in poor condition, that's going to generate a repair request. So now I'm further extending out the net of people who can communicate directly with maintenance without having to go into the shop, make a phone call, text, email, have these out-of-system communications. And so I'm going to complete that, and I'm going to push it back to the server, and we'll really be able to see kind of both sides of that equation. So two methods there. I'll put in a problem code, push that in. So now what I'm going to do is move back onto the server side here, and we'll look more at the maintenance piece rather than things that contribute to it. So this is the home page of our operational suite of products. It consists of 3 different elements: B2W Schedule, B2W Track, and B2W Maintain. We'll really focus just on the maintenance piece of things. Okay, but keep in mind that all the elements reside in a single SQL database, and they can help each other. So I'm now going to go into a maintain related function here. I'm going to go to the dashboard. And so inside of maintain, we have a high-level dashboard that lets the shop manager look at some of the most important statistics as to what's going on. So right off the bat, this manager doesn't have to go and check a stack of work orders or talk to 5 mechanics. They can simply log in and see how many requests have come in, how many work orders are we working on, how many time cards do I need to approve. And they can jump to whatever area they need to start working on. But in this case, I'm going to go right to the requests. So just as we talked about, it's a single place where these requests can come in. So I'll see here's the pulls to the left that came in from the track users. Right next to it is seatbelt needs repair that came in from B2W Inform. And I also can see preventive maintenance items that have been generated automatically by the system. So again, a single place where now instead of someone having to go and get the information comes directly to you. So significantly fewer steps, a much more efficient workflow. Also notice that, if I click on a given piece of equipment here, if I were to say add to work order, it's going to walk me through a smart workflow. So I can see that, I can add it to an existing work order, and then I can also see if there's other things that are out for that piece of equipment. Okay, I'm going to cancel out of that. I'm going to take one of our repair requests. And also point out that this piece of equipment has active warranties on it. So the system will actually tell you if there's a warranty on that equipment, so you could look at the equipment and see if maybe this is a repair that would be covered by the manufacturer instead of you having to pay for it. So I'm going to put this on a work order, and then what we'll see is I have the ability to schedule that out. So I can put some pretty important information onto the work order here. I could give the work order a due date. In this case, I'll say it's going to be due in 2022. So my old sample data here, June 1st. Get her done. And I can see I have a lot of ability to put in maintenance coding, but also things like the planned number of hours that this should take and the parts that are necessary. So here too, right, I don't have to write it all up. I can just kind of add from a list, and then by saving it, I immediately make it part of the work order instead of having to go in multiple places. Then when I go onto the schedule here, I can start to schedule work orders and give them to my mechanics. So in this case, I'm going to drag and drop a work order and give it to, say, Gary Adams. And now, when I do that, Gary Adams now immediately has access to that work order. And so if I look out in the field, I would be able to see that on my tablet. So again, I don't have to go into the office, get a piece of paper, or have an Excel spreadsheet emailed to me. I just now go into my tablet. I'm going to go back onto the tablet here. I'm going to sign out as the foreman, and I'm going to sign back in, but this time as Gary Adams. Now I can see the work order. And that communication can go both ways. So the office can give work orders to Gary Adams, but Gary can also create work orders on his own that would then show up in the schedule. And again, this data moves back and forth without anybody having to make phone calls or physically go back to the office. We can also leverage that telematics data again. So not only can we pull in meter readings, but we can also do things like find nearby maintenance. So I can say, well, look, if you're going to go and repair that 330, let's see if there's anything else nearby that I might also want you to repair. And so I can see where the equipment is currently located, and then I can see if there's anything nearby. And so now I can more effectively route my mechanics because I can send him to fix two things instead of fixing one thing, he leaves, and then somebody else pulls him behind him from a different job site. So lots of ways for them to be able to help shrink the number of actions that each person takes. I'm going to move on and show you some of the preventive maintenance stuff. So we talked about it, but the system allows you to create an unlimited number of preventive maintenance programs. So you can make programs that are specific to your excavators, your loaders, crew trucks, pavers. You can even do fixed assets like asphalt plants or concrete plants, etc. But within each one of these programs, you can create an unlimited number of service items that will end up becoming requests on the board. And so each one of these can be pre-configured with very detailed information about what should be done during that service. It can be pre-configured with how long it should take a mechanic to do that and what parts are needed. So as many of the knowns as possible can be filled in ahead of time once, and then this is all less work that has to be done to create that work order with that PM item. And probably most importantly, this is where that proactive nature comes in. You tell the system when this needs to be triggered. So you can set up intervals. You can say, well, look, 500 hours or 3 months, whichever comes first. So you can make it meter-based or calendar-based to make sure that even maybe crucial maintenance that happens when there's low utilization going on, it still occurs, even if maybe the number of hours haven't tripped. But beyond that, this is a big part of the proactive nature too. You can set the threshold for when the alert itself gets triggered. So in other words, if I want this PM to be done at 500 hours, I don't want you to tell me when the machine hits 500 hours, because then I have to do it, and it could already be on a job site, and then I have to pull it off the site, find a replacement. So I can say, well, look, generate the request this far ahead of the meter interval. So 50 hours ahead, it's going to tell me when that machine hits 450 hours. And so now I'll have about a week to plan the downtime or make sure that when it comes back from the last job, it stays in the shop and gets the PM, and I send out a different 330. So all these aspects of the PM mean that, A, you're going to get more notice, which increases the likelihood that they're going to get done at all. And by giving you that lead time, it increases the likelihood that those PMs are going to be performed on time or ahead of schedule, which is really going to be a crucial piece to helping prevent unnecessary downtime. So those are the PMs. Next, what we'll do is we'll look at the real-time access to data. So I can have requests come in, I give the work orders to mechanics, my PMs are firing. How are we as an organization doing? Well, I'm going to go into an area here where I have a list of reports. And these are all reports that come with the system. And there are basically many different ways of slicing and dicing all the data that we're gathering from the system. So I don't have to retype anything into Excel or a different database or back of the napkin math. I can come to one place and say, well, how much did we spend on maintenance? And I can just click on a report, and I'd be able to see for each piece of equipment, how many work orders has it had? How many equipment hours and equipment costs and labor hours and labor costs and parts costs? What did I spend maintaining that piece? And once I have that, I can then start to make some comparisons, right? So even up here in this simple report, I could group by equipment type. And so I can start to see for a group of equipment. So let's look at my Bobcats here. I've got 3 Bobcats. The average repair for each one of them or the average amount spent on them is $411. But I look over at each unit, I've got 2 of them that are under $220 and one of them that's over $850. Now, maybe that's a problem, or maybe that machine just gets all the toughest assignments. Either way, I know about it and I can at least start looking in. Maybe that is an older machine and there's a decision to be made about whether to maintain it or maybe get rid of it. Okay, but until you know that information, it's difficult to do that. So that's one aspect. Another aspect, again, in terms of getting more proactive and maximizing fleet value, you can do things like look at your warranties. So in the maintenance area here, I could run a report that would show me things like my maintenance warranties. So this is a report that shows warranties with their expiration. How many of my pieces have any warranties left on them, and how far away are they from going off warranty? So now, if I'm starting to look at what machines maybe are coming in for PM, or even things like look at machines that are within 30 days of their warranty expiring or within 5%, so that as those machines start to come in for anything else, I can maximize the value of those repairs. Looks like we had a question come in. Does the software integrate with Verizon Reveal Connect? I'm not familiar with that system. If that's telematics, we would look to see if their telematics system is AEMP compliant. I think we are compatible with at least 1 or 2 Verizon. There's multiple Verizon systems, so I need to check on that one. And Sage 300, yes, we are compatible with Sage 300. So, for example, we can take mechanic time cards from those work orders, and we can export them out of our system and import them to Sage 300 to drive payroll. So yes, we can. So another way of looking at the real-time data, one of the last examples here I'll show is that we also have some great dashboards. And this last dashboard that I'm going to show you here is really about some industry standard KPIs or key performance indicators. And so you can see here emergency maintenance items. I can see how much of my work is emergency versus planned or preventative. And that's a really important statistic to know. I think world-class organizations want to keep that under 10% or 20%. So I can see here I've got some work to do to make my organization more proactive. And over here, things like schedule compliance. How often am I completing my work orders when I said that I would? And I'm not doing a very good job of that right now. So that means that I'm planning work orders and they're getting done either late or significantly late. Why is that? And over here, mechanics with double time or overtime, I'm down to 10%, and that's about where I want to be. Right? So really great organizations cap their overtime or at least try to keep it under 10%. And the more proactive you get and the less reactive you are, the more likely you are to attain that, because you now know how many people you need and for how often to get the work done. And you have less overtime due to we have to stay late and fix this to get it back up and running, or overages due to travel for unexpected repairs. So all that information is delivered in real time without anybody having to do anything. So that's a pretty good overview of the software. What we're going to do now is kind of go back into the PowerPoint presentation to look at some of the other aspects. And probably the one that we can use here to really make that return on investment tangible is a little ROI tool that we have. And we built this tool based on feedback from clients. It's very basic, but it does do a pretty good job of outlining just exactly how you can derive an actual financial benefit from implementing these systems. So we're going to go through that ROI tool, and we're going to show you 3 examples here, kind of a small, medium, and large shop. Looks like another question came in. Does the system can it track fuel cost? If yes, how is it captured in the system? From accounting software or manual entry or CSV files? So the answer is yes, we can track fuel cost inside of Maintain. There is a capability within the system to put in fuel, and you can put in how much fuel and what the cost was, and it keeps a lifetime tally of how much fuel that piece of equipment has burned. And you can import that through a CSV file as well as entering it manually. So I'm going to go through these, the kind of small, medium, and large organizations. And I'm just going to jump out of PowerPoint for a sec here and start out. So I'm going to start with the small organization here. And so here's our ROI calculator. I'm going to walk through this one the first time just so you can get a sense of how it works. And then we'll really just look at the results from the other 2. But essentially, we start out with the solution cost. So here you can see, a manager's license, mechanic license. So for a small shop with 50 pieces of equipment and 2 mechanics, to put that in place, including training and implementation, and even things like buying the tablets and stuff like that, you'd be looking at about $35,000 as the upfront cost. And then on an ongoing basis to pay the software maintenance fees on the licenses you bought, be about $3,000. So that's the cost of the solution. Then we look at what do you get. So starting out, again, 50 pieces of equipment, 2 mechanics. We put on an approximate $50 an hour cost. It's probably low. And then we look at, okay, well, what is your overtime at? And so if you say, well, look, we're doing 50 hours a week, that means that your overtime is at 20%. If you can use a system to get that down to the 10%, which is achievable if you're more proactive and less reactive, you're saving 6 hours a week per mechanic times 52 weeks. That's $41,000 by lowering the overtime. Then we look at work order management savings. So this one's a little bit more technical, so I'll kind of walk through this. We separate out the concept of critical pieces and non-critical pieces. So here we take into account the fact that, if you say I have 1,000 pieces of equipment, well, they're not all the same in terms of their impact on the business. Yeah, I might have a crew with a paver and 2 pickup trucks. If the pickup truck, goes out, well, all right, we'll just ferry some people with the extra truck and have someone drop by another one. That paver goes out of commission, the entire crew is out of commission, and it could be a significantly larger repair. So we approximate 25% of the fleet are these critical pieces, which will have a higher work order cost, and the rest of it are non-critical pieces, which would have a lower work order cost. So when we get into the work order cost, we say, well, okay, for a critical piece, for a small shop, it might be $3,000 and $750 for non-critical. Where the cost savings comes in is there's industry research that shows that when you make a repair and you're doing it when you plan it, so it's a planned repair, whether it's corrective or replacing a part, that is 25% less expensive than if you do that same repair because it's a failure in the field, because of either ancillary damage, it just takes longer to repair, to wrench it out rather than a proper. So we take the cost of those work orders and we say you're saving 25% on those by moving them from unplanned to planned. So if your goal is 20% unplanned and you're currently at, whatever you might be here, 25%, then that means you're going to move this number of work orders from planned to unplanned, saving $750 or about $200 on the other work orders. You would be saving about $45,000 a year by having less unplanned work, and because that planned work is less expensive than unplanned work, you become more efficient and the work orders are less expensive on average. Then we look at warranty claims. So again, there's industry math that says that for every 9 pieces, you would have about 1 warranty claim per year. And at a very small $500 claim, if you're only catching 4 now, and then with our software you catch 6, that's 2 extra warranty claims or $1,000 a year. There's also a lot of time that can be saved. That is a little bit harder for us to, in good faith, monetize. So we put it here just so you can see things like, hey, if they can enter meter readings from their tablet instead of having to send someone out with a tally sheet and send that sheet back. They can just push it in directly. That saves some time. Approving time cards within the system instead of paper time cards. The amount of time spent that a mechanic has to spend looking for stuff because they have information on their tablet. Those are all time savings that we did not include in the calculation. But if we take what we went through here, we look at the cost of the solution and the dollars that can be saved. If we look at the results, we'll see that the very first year, you'd spend about $37,000 on the solution, and then the benefit would be $87,000. So right off the bat, you come out $50,000 ahead. And then as those years go on, you're still reaping the benefits of the more efficient organization, but your costs are going down because you're not buying those licenses every year. You're really just paying the maintenance on them. So that savings goes up to $80,000 a year. Okay? Now, that's a lot of money. When we talk about why wouldn't you want to buy maintenance software, that number really becomes one aspect of the question. The other aspect is, well, how much effort does it take for us to get the software loaded? And so we'll look at that a little bit later. But just keep that in mind. A small shop could potentially realize $50,000 to $80,000 a year in terms of savings. Now, let's look at a bigger shop. So we'll go right to the medium shop. And in the medium shop here, here we go. The medium shop, the cost of the solution is about $54,000. So if I jump back, we're really talking about another manager license and then 4 mechanics and maybe a little bit of extra implementation and some devices here. So we'd be looking at 4 of those or 6 of them. So your solution is now $54,000, and the benefit is $300,000 because you're realizing more work order savings. You're reducing the amount of overtime across more mechanics. So now you're looking at a return on investment of $270,000 in year 1 and over $300,000 in years 2, 3, and 4. So the larger the organization, the larger the upfront spend, but the larger that you recuperate. And then last but not least, let's look at what that would be for a very large organization. So if I look at a much bigger shop where we have something like 500 pieces and 1 manager and 8 mechanics, the results now are even more telling. You're looking at about a $90,000 spend, but getting $760,000 back. So just under $700,000 as a return in year 1 and $750,000 in years 2, 3, and 4. Now, I can tell you that we have had clients that have experienced actually greater returns than these, depending on how many problems that they were experiencing out of the gate and how they chose to tackle it. So the return on investment for properly implemented software can be very real. So that's great, really good, compelling argument. The last part of this is the part that everyone really should be considering, which is why not to use maintenance software. And there's a number of reasons. The first one is when it's not the right time. Now, I put in there, beware of we're too busy, because we do hear that a lot. Well, we're really, really busy. Now is not the right time to get software. That's not a great reason. The reason you're busy is because your processes are inefficient and take too long. So it's a circular argument, right? If you can't get less busy until you have software, but you can't get the software until you're not busy enough, that's going to cancel it out. So if you're just too busy, then you really need to make time for the software. But there are a lot of things that happen to companies that make it a non-optimal time. Probably the biggest one is implementing an ERP system. A lot of times companies go through growth and they don't have a maintenance system, and then they also either don't have a real ERP or accounting system, and they might want to take those two on at the same time. It is possible, but when you have 2 really big systems going in at once, especially when they interact with each other, there's much greater risk of failure on both projects. So there are times when an organization might have already bitten off more than it can chew, and it should digest that first major upgrade before they go into ours or before they go into any maintenance management software system. Same true with things like field tracking systems. So if you're going through a huge change in systems, that might not be the right time. Or if there's going through an unstable period where there's huge employee turnover. That happens a lot too, right? Things are really crazy. We need a new system, but we can't seem to keep a shop manager. Well, if you're going to go through multiple transitions of people at the same time that you're implementing a software system, that too is huge risk for you train up 5 people and then 3 of them leave and the other 2 are so busy they can't use the new system. There's an organizational risk there. So just a few examples of when, really you might be looking at a system, but purchasing and implementing it need to take a back burner. The second bullet here, I'll have a whole slide over this, but when there isn't organizational buy-in, and this is a really big challenge, when larger organizations have multiple pieces to that puzzle and not all of the pieces agree. In fact, I'm going to go through these other 2, but we're going to spend a little time on that organizational buy-in. So we'll come back to it. The third one is when the juice isn't worth the squeeze. So when the ROI is not justified. And this goes back to my statement about looking at that ROI tool. That's great that a small shop could spend $30,000 and get $80,000 back, right? Who wouldn't want $50,000? But the strain on a smaller organization can be very large, especially if you're butting up against some of those problems at the top where, we have some employee turnover, we just implemented a new system. You really have to look at the amount of organizational change, and there is always some friction with change. Is that going to be worth it? Is it worth, if I have 4 mechanics that are on board and 2 that aren't, is it worth putting those 2 mechanics at risk to save $40,000 a year? Maybe it isn't. Right? Companies have to have very honest conversations with themselves about what the system is going to achieve, and is it worth going through all the change that's going to be necessary. Most of the time it is, but there are times when it's not. And then the last one, before I jump into that organizational buy-in, is unrealistic expectations. You have to really understand what you think the system is going to do and whether that's really going to deliver the value that you want. We've seen clients that will go through very extensive processes, and they're like, we just, it doesn't do this, it doesn't do that, it doesn't purchase everything and literally put it on the shelves for us. It doesn't integrate with our employee time off system that schedules breaks and vacations 5 years in advance. Like, there's just limits to certain systems. They have core capabilities. A lot of times they take those core capabilities outside and do some integrations for things like timekeeping and payroll, etc. But every system is going to have its limits unless you have unlimited resources for dollars and time. So know exactly what you're getting and what it's going to do. So I'm going to go to that organizational buy-in. This is a really important one. First and foremost, the executives really should see the value in it. If there's a larger organization where you have a process where you have executives that might be not that involved, and so you have middle management that's pushing for the tool, but the executives who actually end up signing the check, they don't understand the value of the data, and that they expect it to be without any change in their organization. That's a big red flag for your organization might not be ready. They have to really mandate the adoption of that tool. And so if you have some middle people on board, but not all, and the executives aren't behind the ones who want this change, there's a much greater likelihood that the system is not going to be successful. So executives need to see the value of it and use it and know that there's going to be some level of organizational disruption, and then they have to be behind their teams to mandate the change in the company. Shop managers, sometimes we experience the reverse. The executives know that the company has to grow and change and modernize. And so they go on a very extensive search, but the folks that actually have to do the work are not on board. They don't like change. They don't adopt technology. That's a big risk. So if your executives and middle management are not aligned, that can be a big problem. The shop managers are the ones that actually do the work. They have to validate the workflow. Is this going to meld with our organization? They also have to be willing to participate in the implementation. You can't just throw the software on a server and hope for the best. That's a recipe for failure as well. So they have to participate in the implementation, and then once it's implemented, they have to adopt it and use it and expect that from their mechanics and admin. And same thing down here, right? Not that it's a vertical, but everyone involved in the chain has to be part of it. Mechanics have to validate the workflow. Sometimes shop managers or executives will choose a system that really doesn't address how mechanics need to do their job, but the mechanics need to participate in training and adoption, as well as admin staff too. You're getting a system to drive payroll, but you haven't involved the payroll person. That is a recipe for them saying, look, did you forget about this? This is why that won't work. Or just, plumb being surprised and not liking the system because it was kind of thrown on them at the last minute. If you have all of these parts of the organization in alignment, you are ready for maintenance management software. If you have one or two that aren't aligned, you need to get them involved. And if none of them are aligned, you really should not get maintenance management software. So here's a quick summary of kind of what we described and talked about for the last 45 minutes. Are you ready for maintenance software? Well, do you have issues related to the organization that you can tie down to maintenance? What are the problems we're experiencing? And do we think those problems are costing us money? Do we think we could do better? Then you go out on the open market and you look for solutions that solve those problems. There's a 98.6% chance it's B2W software. I don't know why it works out that way, but it does. There are other solutions. We've heard of them. It's probably us, though. But, all joking aside, you're trying to match up the problems that you're facing with systems that address those problems. Then you want to look at the cost, right? Everyone always wants to know how much it's going to cost. The initial and ongoing costs. We showed in ours that you basically buy the licenses up front, and then there's a pretty minimal but real cost going forward. Not all systems are like that. Some have lower cost up front, but the cost is consistent for as long as you own it, and over 3, 4, or 5 years, you end up spending much more. So know what your long-term investment is going to be, and then look at the return on investment. If we solve these problems, what is the deliverable back to us from a financial perspective, and is that amount of money sufficient for the cost and how aligned our organization is? If it's going to be like pushing a rope and it's $1 million and we get $100,000 back, we're not ready for maintenance management software. If it's $100,000 and everybody is super excited about it and we get $150,000 back every year going forward, that's a recipe for we're ready for maintenance management software. So that's a great place for us to kind of wrap up. Hopefully this has been of some value. I don't see any more questions in the questions panel. Just a couple of quick reminders. If you're ready for maintenance management software, feel free to call our sales department. If maybe you saw some capabilities in software that you already own, you can also contact our support department and ask any questions. Quick reminder for anyone that is maybe on this webinar and you had colleagues that couldn't attend but wanted to, anyone that registered for this webinar will receive a link to the recorded session. So you will be able to access this and give it to colleagues for a recorded session. And then last but not least, don't forget our next webinar, which is June 15th, Conquer Change Order Challenges. So thanks everyone for attending, and we look forward to seeing you in future webinars.